the TemTeam Cup May Edition. I'm Quarter, and here we have a Group A match between J-Doragon and, apologies for the typos, ladies and gentlemen, xukly. So this is another of our fellow Tamers contestants, so another person I don't know nearly as much about. We're just getting into their match now, so let's get to it. And so as we get in here, we see that J-Doragon, as always, is bringing the spice. JD always has some really interesting things, flexing the perfect Luma Nox, having a Cycrox in there, having an Inky in there, having a Mix in there, all things that we only see bits and pieces of here and there, especially the Inky and the Cycrox. We don't see nearly as many of those. In the meantime, xukly has a pretty straightforward team. We're seeing a lot of Golzies out of fellow Tamers. Very interesting to see. Also, I see the Big Epic in there, always a nice thing to pick up, and Valorant, that Tem that never really fell off as hard as we all expected it to. So, getting into our ban phase here, and yep, we see the Volfi ban and the Inky ban. These all make a certain degree of sense. I think, honestly, xukly does have answers to the Inky, but it is pretty spooky into their teams. A lot of electric and crystal weaknesses on there. Not something you really want to deal with if the wrong things get banned. I can respect this out of xukly. If nothing else, it can be hard to play against this kind of a Tem, and JD has been really good at piloting Inky in the field. We see instead the really beefy opener of Yowler Calibus, kind of a beat this if you dare, but JD's just like, okay, as he brings out Mashuk Mix, which definitely is the sort of thing that can soften up and take down a Yowler if given the time and effort to. The energy manipulations and Psy Surges coming off of the Mix alongside the P-Jabs from the Mashuk can be really frightening for our bear there. Moving into our second bans, and should be interesting seeing what happens next. Right, so if I'm looking at their ban for the next one, honestly, I kind of like the Turok ban. I know it feels weird, but it's just that Turok actually threatens the pants off of, like, that Valorant, and to a certain extent, the Calibus right there. It's something that I would consider there. Looks like xukly is doing the much more prescient way of banning, which is just sort of keeping your cursor up top until you make your decision. So that's always a wise thing to do. Keep your opponents guessing. Honestly, looking at the rest of this field, okay, no, they go for the Nox, which also, I don't know, they got the Valorant. I guess if the Valorant gets counterbanned right here, then it's a really hard time for them to actually break through that. So this makes sense if they're anticipating a Valorant ban right now, which incidentally does look pretty good for JD. They still have the Cycrox, Mashuk, a lot of things that don't necessarily appreciate a Feathergat throwing them in the face when they can't poison it back. It's a pretty reasonable ban, all things considered. Especially since JD is Inkyless at the moment, which is always kind of a concern. Right. That said, we could see a Mimit ban here, get rid of another big, thick thing from xukly, since that can become any number of things like that. Or the Kinu, which would disable some of the more degenerate combinations of Kinu and the high-octane, beefy boys that we're seeing in this front line. Also turns off the admittedly nightmarish Kinu Golzi combo we've been seeing out of fellow Tamers as of late. Yep, we do see a Kinu ban. This makes a lot of sense. As I've said before, if you're running any type of aggression, taking out the Kinu is never a bad shout. It can really mess with your momentum. And also, given the fact that JD has a number of things that kind of want to, like, stay on the field, like Mashuk, that don't like getting beta burst in the face, it would be kind of awkward. We see the Vola Golzi very quickly picked up from xukly. Vola still being very good into JD's team, as we discussed. And then we also have the Volfi picked up from JD. Volfi feels pretty strong here if it gets holed up and if it gets the right field. It's very swingy because, like, you know, the Plagues into Calibus, you know, that's still neutral damage into a admittedly very chunky Tem, but then also you're messing with its stam bar, which is always something that you want to deal with. And then also if you get the Dust Vortex on Golzi, then it's basically just dead in the water. Usually Volfis do tend to outspeed, and we see the Cycrox, which alongside the Mix means that we do genuinely have the threat of a Digi-threat. That could be a very interesting thing. We see the Mimit as the last pick out of xukly, and here we go. We are into our first game. So, honestly, I like JD's opener here more. like, yes, you get the show off and the, like, pretty straightforward Yowler lead, but the problem with Camo Yowler is, there we go, you can't lead Kinu Camo Yowler unless you're really speed scuffing your Kinu, and then in the meantime, it's kind of awkward. What we could see is xukly just go straight into the Mimit and try to go for, like, double Yowler. That feels terrible when you're staring a mix in the face. I'm like, what's the answer to the mix? Golzy could be an answer to the mix, but the problem is Golzy can't actually swap in on the mix, because if that Kala eats a C-Spikes right now, then it's kind of horrifying how much that would do to Golzy. Now that said, if I'm JD, I kind of want to throw some aggression into this Yowler fast before it starts getting going, because this is your classic chamomile, I'm gonna show off turn 1, then charge at you sort of thing. But no, xukly fakes it out, immediately swaps in the Valorant on the Yowler slot, just apropos of nothing, eating the Crystal Spikes with the very beefy Valorant, only taking 75% from that. The double in does go down. What's this Calibus doing? The Calibus strangles the mix, impeding the aggression from JD. No, honestly, that turn did not go the way I expected it to. Interesting play out of xukly there, protecting the Yowler from, like, the heavy focus in that we saw JD go for. We also have revealed the Strange Vest on Mix, which is going to be potentially really wild for those calcs. The Golzy comes in on the Calibus slot. This could actually be risky. We don't know where the aggression is going this time. There's not the Lightning Rod that we got the last game, well, the last round where you had the Yowler in. If we were going for this, I'd honestly say, like, a double swap would have been fine there. Oh no, of course, the Strangle on the mix means you can safely swap in the Golzy. My problem is then you're still facing a Crystal Spikes to the face this turn. That's problems. So, looking at this, honestly, if I'm xukly, I still think I'm fine with this field. The biggest issue with that is, like, I don't think the Charged Iron Filings is going to do nearly as much as you want, but, like, I don't see what your other opportunities here are. You want to hit mix hard. I guess you could Oshi mix. Oshi is reasonable, but I just don't have confidence in this Golzy being able to take down the mix from here when it's Strange Vest as well. Now, one thing I'd love to see, Mimit in the Vola slot. Mimit in the Vola slot would just tear this board apart, because then you get your own mix, and that's really fun to see. We do see the Oshidashi go down on the mix. With the Strange Vest on, it goes down to 53% from the Oshidashi. The Diffuser comes down as well, seizing it, meaning it is now vulnerable to special attacks. Was this xukly's plan all along? Sorry, vulnerable to physical attacks. What am I saying? It does, however, go into Puppet Master range with the combination of these two attacks. Doesn't look like that played out at all. Because now it's, you know, in exactly that nightmare mode. Unless you have Tsunami on your... Oh, yeah, okay, this could work. I was going to say unless you have Tsunami on the Calibus, but you know what? 2 Toxic Plumes, one consecutively after the other. That could do this. That could do this. Like, you plumes once this turn, you plume another time the second turn. Problem is, JD's just going to swap out. He's not going to give you that opportunity. Swaps in the Turok, which absolutely devours Valorant. Hardest hitting Feather Gatling of the 2 evolutions, and we've got 5-head right here, ready to perfect jab this Mimit into a horrible, horrible spot. The first Toxic Plume comes out, but with no way to trap the mix in, it just dashes out of there before it really has to worry about anything. The anaerobic procs are useful, but it's not going to be very useful against this board where everything's hitting them physically. The Feather Gat does come in, and it does do a reasonable amount of damage to 5-head. But my concern here is that you kind of want to get that Mimit out of dodge, or rather get your Valorant out of dodge. I'd actually prefer seeing the Valorant get out. Now, Sweatband Valorant is still really valuable here. I do think it's genuinely a good thing. Otherwise, this Valorant would have overexerted by now, and that would have been a horrible, horrible time. But we kind of need to see this Valorant swapping this turn, I think, because you need to keep your spread for mix now. But you've got this other Valorant here that's perfectly willing to, like, throw aggression at the board. Yes, it's also got minus defense, but you can't exactly change that now. Floof, the Volfi, comes in on the Mashuk spot. Makes sense. The Mashuk's pretty spent at this point. The Valorant does bounce as we see Yowler re-enter the field, which is actually horrifying, into both of these Earths. The Oshidashi off of this will still slap, even though it did not get the Savage Soup, even though it did not get the show-off up, which, you know, that's important. The plumes comes down again. I'm actually kind of surprised that they just kind of spent plumes there. That's a very expensive move for what's ultimately not very much in terms of value on this board, unless you're, like, just trying to get a poison tick off on Turok, but the team elusive there really made that feel rough. So, we do see almost immediately a swap out of xukly, getting the Mimid out of there, moving the Calibus back into the battlefield, still kind of awkward into Turok, but the Turok's bouncing as well, fearing the inevitability of an Oshi-Dashi on that spot, as Peepo's Simp, the amazing Cycrox, does enter the board instead. So the Plague comes down onto the Calibus, which traps that in. That's going to be kind of frustrating, because obviously one of the best things about Handcuffs Volfi is not necessarily actually just the exhaust, it's the fact that you're trapping things in on the board. Removing that mobility for like 3 turns is so important in my opinion. And it's definitely going to be useful here, because this means the Turok can come back in on a more comfortable board. Or alternately, we just see the mix pop in once this Yaller runs out of immunity. Like, there's a couple different things that could happen here. You know, we could even see a Digi-Threat onto Paul. I didn't consider that. I feel like you saved the Mix at this point. No, Mix is Puppet Master. What am I talking about? Mix doesn't have to worry about any single target attacks, unless this is the mythical Tsunami Calibus that I had talked about earlier. So, we do see the Mix come in. JD is not afraid of any Tsunamis this turn, and it does look like he's going to be going for the Digi-Threat, with the Puppet Master hitting our fine Cycrox there, alongside the Savage Suplex, which does not do nearly enough damage onto this fine frog, which is looking to be very bulky indeed. The Digi-Threat hits Yowler, which I am also kind of surprised by. Like, I'm assuming you wanted that for Doom, but then, like, you know, immunity exists. But it could just be to get chip damage onto Yowler this turn, or anticipating a swap. But I got nothing there. I was kind of expecting that to land on the Calibus, if I'm perfectly honest, because, you know, that thing's a chunky boy that just lives for days, and that could be really frustrating. Instead, though, we see the Mashuk hit the field instead. Still a fine wall for Mix to hide behind. Eats a lot of these Calibus attacks. The Yeller does swap out as the Mimid hits the board instead. Really nice anticipation of this by JD. This, I think, is fantastic. So the swap from JD right there means that xukly does not get the Cycrox in return, which would have allowed for a couple like shenanigans like Digi-Threat into a lot of his team, which I don't think he could have in any good conscience allowed. Anticipating what appears to have been the swap. Actually, no, that was safe into about the Yaller and that. Like, that's less my, like, sort of galaxy brain for that. Psy-surging a Yaller is generally considered to be a good move, but hitting that on the Mimid as well while it's copying Mashuk, you know, that's good times. This definitely seems to be a beefy Mimid, though. Still standing strong at 47%. Definitely looks like your HP speed variant that we see on occasion. xukly is swapping an absolute shedload in that left slot, though, and I'm kind of concerned about their momentum. You keep swapping, you don't wind up getting damage on the board, and even though, yeah, you're staring a bunch of things in the face, you kind of eventually just need to start getting some damage out there. The H-slaps are coming down. The Valorend has now hit 13.1%. It had better have a hyperkinetic strike, or it's going to be real rough at getting anything on this board with a Mix sitting there with 3 pryos staring it in the face. I think xukly just kind of has to accept the fact that something needs to die here for them to get a favorable board state. So it looks like they do take the hint for that one and go for the third. Just let the Valorant go down. This is fine. They still have other ways to deal with a lot of JD's team, as the P-Jab lands on the Calibus, which is perfectly capable of eating that. Still just like throwing, okay, Toxic Inks into the Mashuk. I suppose that's pretty reasonable into it still. Yeah. In terms of what I'm expecting, yeah, no, Yaller's the perfect thing to come back into this board. Obviously, it still hates the Psy-Surge, but, like, you can probably eat a Psy-Surge. You have a Hibernate. It'll be fine. And in the meantime, you can suplex this Mashuk in the face, hopefully for massive damage, or alternately, instigate a swap. Now, obviously, the Cycrox is still a deep concern here, and the other thing that could be happening is that xukly is conserving their Chamomile, knowing that Digi-Threat is an option that JD is throwing into there. I'm concerned, however, that attempting to conserve that has heavily impeded the rest of their momentum inside this game. They've lost two slots, and one of them was basically just hard swapping constantly. And that does not fill me with confidence there. We do see the Cycrocs return to the field again, which definitely is going to be a bit frightening to see. The Emanip comes down, and that brings it already down to just under 40%. Clinch hits the Frog. I'm curious as to how much damage this does. It brings it down to 41%. That's actually pretty good. You know, getting it under half is nice. The problem here is it's still going to be taking a ton of punishment, and you have to worry about the Psy Surge this turn. You can't afford to trade. One thing, and it's pretty clear now that there is no spread on xukly's team outside of the Valorant, which is down, which also big problems. Because this means this mix can kind of just T-pose on this field, as it has been doing. Unless we can get a double KO on JD's side of the board. And JD will maneuver the board to ensure that that doesn't happen. The fact of the matter is, onto this charming Froggo, like, about the only thing you can afford to do is suplex. But if you suplex, I'm not 100% convinced that the Turok is KO'd from that. If you Oshi, however, I don't think the Mashuk is KO'd from that. Even on -2 defense, I just don't think that's possible from there. That's still 25% health, and with the amount of defensive investment that you generally see in Mashuks with Parrier, I'm not filled with confidence in terms of that. In the meantime, though, we do see a H-Slap just land onto the Cycrocs. The Psy Surge does go down first. It looks like xukly is ready to make that trade, but it's not a trade, is it? The Mix-Out Speeds is willing to overexert for that. Perhaps that was just unanticipated, and the Digi-Threat lands onto the Calibus. This is very quickly turning into JD sweeping up the end game here. Can the Mimit pull this back? We finally have the Cycrocs on xukly's side. Is that enough? There's still 5 Tems on that board, and there's 2 Doom on this Calibus now. This is looking pretty done. Unless there's a miracle that I'm not seeing here. Yeah, no. xukly's tapping out. Well played to JD, dominating that field and constantly repositioning, and in an unprecedented display, like really protecting the right slot against potential Mimit plays early. Well played, obviously, to xukly, protecting heavily against the other stuff that we wind up seeing there. Whoops. And in the meantime, just sort of being very strong into that, regardless of the pressure that JD asserted onto that field. Like, my biggest concern with that was the early swaps and the, inopportune positioning that xukly wound up having there. Like, there were a lot of good things that wound up happening, and the strangle early on to try to get the Golzy out there, inspired. But the teching from JD was rough into that. Genuinely an interesting thing to see. So, as we wait for our contestants to enter their next match, my next question is, how is xukly going to adapt to this? Especially considering that, honestly, I don't think Noxolotl was the big threat there. I think they had more answers to Noxolotl than we had to, basically anything else in that field. The Cycrocs was feeling very punitive that game, and honestly, I'm not sure they had enough to take care of the mix. Yeah, they had other spread, but inside that draft, it was pretty solid into it. It is my hope, however, that once again they learn from their previous bout against them, so that should work out pretty well there. In the meantime, I'm told that we're gonna have about a 2-minute break, so you guys can just hang. If you guys just hang tight for a moment, that'll be fantastic, and we'll be back with another fantastic game for you in around 2 minutes time. And it looks like we're heading back into our next game, as both of our contestants have shown themselves to be ready. We're just waiting for them to invite, and then we'll be diving into our rematch of xukly versus J-Doragon. So yeah, I was pretty impressed by that first bout anyways. I'm really stoked to see a lot of what Fellow Tamers has been bringing to these. I've never seen these guys before, and they're coming in with all this fresh tech, and I'm like, oh man, I so want to see more of this. Right, so now that we're clear on who's inviting on both sides there, it should be no time at all before we wind up seeing everything go down. So we're just gonna hop on into this next match there. And yeah, no, honestly, okay, right. Matchup-wise, I think the Valorant is something that xukly definitely needs to lean on there, and the fact that it's sweatband is going to be incredibly valuable, but my concern is their drafts from last time. I think if you're running a Valorant into that, like, if you first pick that, you don't have to ban the Noxolotl, which, honestly, I think is probably going to be a better play against somebody like JD, who is going to be throwing that mix at you, as we saw. And with that, we're just waiting for there we go. We are in. Just gonna swap us over there, and here we go. And with that, we are straight into it. So, xukly versus J-Doragon, Game 2. I'm interested in seeing how these drafts change at all. I'm honestly surprised that we did wind up seeing the pig last game either, given that I don't recall that being banned at all. I feel like a Pig Epic would have done a lot against that. And yes, there's the first ban of Mix. There's the ban of Yowler out of JD. Makes a lot of sense. When the Mix is gone, what answer does he have to Yowler? It's not there. The Inky is let through. Now, knowing the Inky is let through, are we going to see like a Volfi first pick out of xukly here to try to conserve against that? Like, I understand they're probably going to be concerned about a lot of other things. They first pick the Kinu, making sure they can get that off there. Something that I'm seeing a lot of out of them. So we see on Nox Inky, very aggressive into xukly's lead. This is the Kinu Golzi. This is something that's almost become like a trademark of the Fellow Tamers trainers in this tournament. So this should be interesting seeing this. Obviously, JD is a master of some very unorthodox Tems. He ran Noxolotl way before it was cool, very underground, and has been very much the champion of Inky inside a lot of the contemporary competitive environments. So looking at that, the rest of the pick ban comes by pretty quick. We see a Mashuk ban out of xukly. We see the Volfi ban out of JD. We see we see Mimit, Vola, Kala out of xukly. And then a quick Turok Volfi into what I'm assuming is probably the Cycrox again. Cycrox makes sense. Yeah, that's the Cycrox out of JD as we go into our game 2. Right, so as much as this is rad, I am still deeply if xukly can get a strong pickup early here, if he just like full bodies this Inky, then that could easily escalate into some pretty powerful positioning for xukly. Now, if we see like, I don't know, Calibus actually, I like Calibus swapping in there, or alternately stealing the Inky with Mimit because Inky is on right slot. I think both of those are really good plays. So we do see the Kinu swap. Is it going to be for that? It is for the Calibus. This is kind of the safer play, but I would have loved to see like a ballsy Inky grab there. So Calibus comes in, Cycrox comes in. So this is potentially anticipating the uppercuts going down on that. The green circles did get clicked. It takes it down to 77%, eats it like a champ. But it is seized as a result of that. The Toxic Ink comes down just to get some chip on the Golzi. Always a wise thing to do when you're facing somebody who's gotten protector buffs off. So, from here, the next question is, the next question here is, do we get to see more of Golzi? No, the Golzi swaps out as we see a double Calibus field. Definitely capable of withstanding some of this aggression. The narcoleptic hit comes down and is eaten solidly by the Mimit. These are some very bulky Mimits that we're seeing out of xukly, and yeah, out of fellow teamers in general. I believe, if I recall correctly, Wiki Kernels was also pretty hench in terms of like HP investment. We see the Strangle onto Cycrox, which frees up the Mimit slot a bit. I don't think you can afford to throw water moves at it, is the one thing. So if either of these are running Jet, I think you just have to like pretend you're not running Jet for a bit. My next problem is, while this is good, it's not high momentum. So like JD can reposition here, and my next question is like, how is xukly going to make this into a field that he can still pressure into? And the answer is he is continuing to swap as he brings out the Valorant. Oh, I don't know if Valorant into the Inky is the best repositioning here. I'm wondering if perhaps they were just anticipating no swaps that turn and like just JD staying still, but as they saw from last game, JD is willing to read what the opponent is doing and identify the board and just say, no, I want to change this up, as they swap in the Vulfy and the Inky, both of which are pretty strong here. Plague into that slot, locking it in, while then hitting it hard could be a nightmare for xukly to deal with. As the Quartz Dirt comes down, a rarely seen move, traps both slots, really fun to see. The Dust Vortex comes down as well, potentially expecting the Golzy to come back in. Not really very good against anything else in that slot, but I guess that also cover. Yeah, no, that was a hard cover for the Golzy. But instead, we've still got our double Paul here, which is kind of intimidating. Now, if I'm looking at this, my big concern here is, like, you've got a lot of swap-ins for the Vulfy slot, but you can't guarantee that the Vulfy slot is going to get swapped into. As the Plague comes down into the Kala, and it looks like that is getting hard focused. Yep, nope, so that just winds up slamming into it, as the Thunderstrike does as well, and that brings down our Mimit copy of Paul here, as the Inky does start taking some chip damage from the Toxic Inks, but it's still got a lot of life in the old ticker there. 58.7 is perfectly serviceable, especially into a lot of the rest of xukly's team. xukly is still going into a lot of defensive buffs here, getting the Kinu buff onto their remaining Calibus, which they've definitely identified as a way for them to get out of this. Right, it's still very good into Floof. My only concern is that it's a very good defensive Tem. I'm not entirely sure whether that's like your win condition into this, though. There's still a full HP Turok, and honestly, it doesn't do very much to Potato at all, unless you're just slapping it in the face constantly, but then you need the stamina for that, and we've already seen that nobody runs Sweatband Calibus. I have yet to see a single Sweatband Calibus. Until, like, I don't know, I am astonished by somebody running it. I'm not going to be expecting it. So Kinu swaps out again as the Valorant does come in. The Valorant is a bit more of an actual win condition into this, but it's very frightening bringing that in against Gizmo, but he correctly reads that the Gizmo is going to swap into Turok, but the problem is Turok's still really good into this board. Doesn't care about either of these Tems. The Dust Vortex comes down on the Valorant. The Valorant eats it pretty comfortably, and the Strangle lands onto the Turok. This is pretty good, obviously, because this means the Turok cannot Feathergat either of these spots. The Vulfy's kind of sitting dead in the water, but that's an easy swap back into Gizmo, which chamomiles off the defense debuff and is perfectly willing to throw Thunderstrikes into the Valorant slot, which outside of Golzy there aren't too many answers for. So the next question is, if we see that swap then, do we also see a swap to Cycrox on the other spot? There's no Digi-Threat synergy, but that's still very intimidating if we wind up seeing something like just a Golzy coming in there that takes double damage to Digital. You don't like taking double damage from Digital as a Golzy, even when you have a +1 on both defenses. Not a very bulky Tem naturally, and it looks like there have been a lot of mid-rangey builds out of fellow tamers so far. So we see Potato return to the field, glorious and immaculate and shining white. Beautiful Luma off of that, as the Inky also hits the field again. A double swap from them. Not quite the swap I was expecting, but we do see a bit of repositioning there regardless. Paul does swap as well, as the Golzy does come in, as the Inky is there anticipating it, ready with Quartz Dirt. I'm not entirely sure what else it has, and honestly, this might be a risky one if this Golzy outspeeds this Inky. was kind of, man, not many positions for you to deal with there as JD though, but you do have the Narc hit to hit back on the Golzi, and it does not want to eat one of those. So once again, debating xukly, we do wind up seeing the Cycrox reemerge, the constant sort of melee wall as much as you can be as a digital into the Golzi with a very high physical defense going in there as the Feather Gatling goes down onto the Noxolotl, which with its defense is still remarkably resilient as it's still 64.3%, gets the reflux off, really just a bit of poison on Golzi there. Like, it's just reasonable damage, but it's not like we've seen any madness buffs yet, and no trance buffs whatsoever. So the combination of those means JD's still grinding this out is the thing. Like, none of these plays are super high octane energy, but like, it's still the sort of thing where we're seeing a lot of generally sort of a good attrition plays from JD. Now that said, the Charged Iron Filings just went down there, and the Cycrox has gone down with it. The Nullification onto Potato as well is actually huge with the Nox Bomb on top of that. That's barely any actual damage there, but at the same time, that's pretty significant in terms of getting Trance off, which just creates a bit of space there for xukly, although that is opening the Pandora's box of +2 reflux, and that regen is strong, as we are seeing there. Now that said, this is the first real momentum that xukly has gotten onto this board. This is a nice bit opening that has happened there. This Golzi could very well pop off, but it needs to be careful, obviously. You can't just let yourself die to a plague, but honestly, the Nox Bomb into the Volphy there should still clap. And as we've seen, the Sweatband Volphy there is perfectly willing to take this down. However, we do notice that Potato there is just healing right on back up. The Pillow Nox alongside the regen means that it's already back up to a very healthy degree of hit points there. If I recall correctly, that looked like, what, around almost 50% right there. It was like 40, in the high 40%. Yeah, checking that, that's like 47.8%. That's massive. The Plague hits the Kinu. Thanks to the Grease, it is not trapped, but in the same time, we do see the Noxious Bomb come down onto the Volphy. That takes it down to just under 30%. We're seeing this is not a very aggressive Valorant at all, but good luck taking it down. This thing looks chonky as all hell. And, yeah, I think this Kinu obviously wants to leave. You don't like getting Nox bombed in the face, but we could just as easily see aggression onto the Valorant, which is gonna get both exhausted and trapped this turn. Not something you want to be locked into when you're facing a Turok, but instead the Kinu stays in and Hypnos the Turok. This is actually really good. Gives xukly the space that they need to get their stamina back up with Valorant. Keep just chonking up there. We could even see a Stonewall next turn. There's absolutely nothing here that would punish that from JD. It kind of really stops him from messing around too much, because it's not like the Volphy here has anything that can casually wake up Turok without doing a massive amount of damage to it. And JD doesn't want to disrupt their position like that. There's absolutely no reason for them to do that. What could easily happen here is they just like reposition with Noxolotl and just slow things down again. We also see the Inky come out. The Inky is of course a nightmare for even a buffed Valorant to deal with. I'm actually curious how much damage it's going to wind up taking from a lot of these things. The Revitalize comes down there, bringing the Valorant back up to full health, and it does look like xukly is desperately trying to slow this game down. And yeah, no, that definitely looks like it's working out for them right now, but the next question is, can they deal with a Turok and an Inky? Two things that a Valorant does not want to stare in the face, while the Valorant still has one turn of trapped on it. So if xukly can find a way through this and sort of like take another Tem out of this, then that's fantastic. But the problem is Valorant doesn't do beans into Inky. Like, all of its offenses are resisted. Crystal resisting the Toxic, Electric resisting the Wind. You don't really do anything to that whatsoever. And Turok also doesn't really mind this at all. Even a Toxic Plume is kind of like a zero-sum game, because you're only getting one more poison proc on the Turok, which is pretty low in terms of energy. But we do see the Golzi come back in onto the Kinu slot. This is concerning because this is a Quartz Dirt, which it is. The Golzi just goes down. Now, granted, okay, my problem there is I think you needed to wait for a swap in for that Golzi because it was so low. Any grace note of a hit was just going to annihilate the poor dude. But in the meantime, it does mean that they can get like a little bit more damage onto Gizmo there, but it means that they're 3 to 4 and they're running out of options. The Golzi was kind of necessary for them to take down some things here, like the Turok and Gizmo. There's other ways to do that, but I'm not sure I want to lean on a Calibus hard into like trying to take down an Inky and a Turok that can hit it back fairly effectively, as we see right there with Paul at +1/+1, still going down to 37% from that Thunderstrike. Pretty massive off the Spec Master there. No joke at all. The Feather Gatling is just plinking away at it, trying to get it down to a point where hopefully the Calibus can deal with it. But the Calibus is down to 6.8%, getting Strangle onto Gizmo before it goes down. Means that there could yet be some value here, but is this enough to take things back? I'm very worried about xukly's condition in this game. We've got Kinu and Valorant, and I'm not sure that you could, like, while Kinu and Valorant saves you against Potato, what do you do about this Turok? This Turok needs to be answered, and you don't, like, Kinu? Is Kinu the answer? If this is like a high special attack Kinu, that could be the way out. But, I'm really worried here, because all this Inky needs to do is just Quartz Dirt again, and it's not going to be going down to these persistent Feather Gats. That's only 7% of damage at the time. It's not looking like that's the most valuable thing to do here, and we're seeing the sheer force of a Turok's Feather Gatling there, still throwing damage into the Kinu, getting it very low indeed. If this is a sacrifice, that's fantastic, but your Valorant's already pretty buffed. It's up to +2/+5 on special defense. You're really just adding physical defense there, which, while good, is that going to be winning you the game here? The problem is xukly has a lot of buffs, but they don't have access to the one thing that they need to give the buffs value, which is HP, against the attrition that JD has done constantly punishing their repositioning. Just a frustrating thing to have to stare into if you're xukly right now, because it's like, you know, you've got the answer for this, but it's trying to get them in the right place at the right time that's the problem. And losing your answer to Gizmo means you just have to plink away for it, and the DC beam knocks out the Kinu before it's able to breathe. If that was a sacrifice, it does not go down this turn. It will come at the cost of the Inky, thanks to the Poison Tick, but that might have even overexerted the Valorant. It does, going down to 68%. The Feather Gatling comes down as well, which does absolutely nothing to the bird. It's going to take a while to plink this bad boy down, but between a Calibus with barely any HP and a Valorant that can't fight back effectively into this, and is going to need to take some turns to take a breather and get its stamina back, I don't know how xukly comes back from this, folks. Right, so my problem here is, yeah, we see the Plague onto the Calibus, which just insta-blaps it. 6.8%, no problem. Volfi's got that. And then, after that, the Turok actually just takes a powder, willing to wait and ensure that it doesn't overexert or get too low on stamina against this Valorant. Wait, we even see the bush there. Is this just, this is a concerning thing. Yep, as people are saying, the problem here is the stamina of Valorant. It's just a lot to deal with, and my biggest concern here is the fact that, even the plumes, which is one of the best ways for a Valorant here to get value, you can't get value against Team Elusive there. It's just no way for it to really happen. In the meantime, Turok's getting free planks off against this. You're going to get an exhaust next turn, which means the next Feather Gat's going to cost like, well, 1.5 times your stamina. It's just going to be a real rough time trying to see this Valorant get to anything. It's going to take a while to take down, but I don't see it taking enough with it. As we're gonna see how much, yeah, no, if we see that, the exhaust means that Feather Gat means that we're right back to resting with Valorant, meaning that all of that positioning that you're trying to do there just doesn't amount to very much into the face of these Tems. Another downside of speccing your Valorant to have very low attack, which means that people can just do this to it, save it till last, and just chip away at it until it goes down. As xukly, despite a valiant showing there and getting some good sort of trades in the sort of mid-game, winds up losing this particular game to JD, who takes both of them in quick succession. 2-0 for J-Doragon in this set. Congratulations and well played to them. And yeah, I'd like to once again thank both of our contestants for doing such a fantastic job there. Definitely a great thing to see. No, it was really wild there. JD always runs a very unorthodox team as well, so it's the kind of thing where if you're not prepared for it and you don't know how it works, it can really take you by surprise. J-Doragon Tech catches a lot of things by surprise there, but don't worry, we actually have just a couple more matches just lining themselves up. As a matter of fact, I think I may be speaking too soon with this right now. I don't have the we don't quite have the right overlay here, but I do believe we might actually have a game from Sortirum going on right now as well. Into our good man JD again. Just gotta double check both of those before everything goes down here. We've had a couple like slots land at the same time, which is always a really good thing, because this means that you get a lot of better games going down at the same time, but it does mean that it does kind of slightly play around with the instanced sort of mechanisms that we generally have here. So with that, I'm just going to go and quickly check to see if our two fine contestants are in fact getting into anything right now. It doesn't look like we are, so we're going to wait for some confirmation before we start wrapping things up here. It looks like we do have another game coming up very quickly here that will be J-Doragon versus Setsuna Faseye, otherwise known as Sortirum, and definitely the sort of thing that's going to be fun in terms of seeing if both of our contestants are indeed prepared and ready for it. Obviously, if JD wants a break between their last game and this one, obviously a very fine thing for them to take. I'm going to leave it up to them to make sure that that happens, as our organizers let us know what's going down. And yep, we have gotten a confirmation that looks like JD is going to be taking a small break. So we're just going to give us like 5 minutes here, and then we'll be right back into it. I'd like to thank you very much for your patience, and we look forward to bringing you right back into some fantastic matches. Thank you very much, folks. And with that, we're getting back into our next game, folks. Right, so we've seen Setsuna Fiseye, otherwise known as Sryzen, in their match versus Luke Leal. They still bring a lot of very intimidating Tems to the table. We saw their 2-Vine, which should shape up fairly well against some of the toxic Tems that JD brings here. Let's see if they can bring a bit of aggression to go along with that and perhaps break through some of the hard things that JD's set up here. I feel like, once again, though, that Inky could be a wild card. I'm very curious to seeing how this winds up going there. Just going to take a moment for us to get into game, and then we'll get stuck right in. And there we go. And as we get into our first game here, it's going to be fun seeing precisely what our pick bans are for both of these teams. Obviously, we've had a pretty good combination there in terms of team compositions here, with JD running some real spice and Sryzen running some pretty well noticed and understood threats inside this particular game. So it should be fun seeing both of them come together against each other. Please ignore whatever the fine officials are doing on screen there for a moment as we, in a very unscuffed manner, sort out our overlay. And then, looking at this, we do see the Mashuk ban once again out of Sryzen. This obviously makes a ton of sense into this. Generally the sort of thing that's pretty wise to see into a lot of Sryzen's lineup. There's not a lot that they have to really answer that, and it punches the living daylights out of Valish. It generally messes with their own Mashuk if they want to try to push with that. There's a lot of different things that it will be pretty frightening with. Still though, leading up with the 2-Vine into the Strange Vest mix could be kind of a frightening thing there. Still, though, we also can see Sryzen hover over that Kinu, which would still make sense inside this. Getting Kinu buffs onto a determined 2-Vine is always a strong move. It can generally also be a slow move, though, that can be taken advantage of by your opponent. It would also mean that there would be no immediate Camo Yaller plays available from Sryzen. We do instead see the Mashuk out in our first pick, which does protect a bit better against that Volfi that JD picks as well. This does mean that with a perfect jab Feathergat, or alternately just an uppercut and Feathergat into that, we could see the Volfi go down pretty quick there, because honestly, I don't think the mix is gonna be going down from like a P-jab CPG combo there, since it is Strange Fest. We see the Cycrocs just straight up banned. We will not see any Doom this game, as Sryzen definitely sees that one coming. The Osiara is indeed counterbanned, which is an interesting thing given the fact that we still have an Oxalotl in the back. Granted, a lot of the Toxics were banned out of Sryzen's, like out of JD's lineup there by Sryzen. So it should be kind of interesting to see in terms of that. Right, so the Kinu comes down, and yeah, this makes a lot of sense out of Sryzen. You kind of want to make sure that you are bolstered against this very considerable long-term threat that JD poses in the terms of their Noxolotl and their Volfi and their Strange Vest mix, all of which, if you don't have the appropriate things to go against them, it can be real dicey. And also, now looking at JD's board, I see the other reason why they banned out the Osiara, which is that that's the only form of spread that Sryzen has brought to this. So if he doesn't get a clean shot on that mix, it's going to be a nightmare taking it down, and it's just going to bedevil him for the entire game. This is going to be something that he really wants to be careful about. So we see the very quick Yukama Noxolotl pick out from the back. Makes a lot of sense there. While Inky's good, there's a lot of things that punch Inky in its face, and we don't like that. Additionally, there's a lot of things that Inky doesn't hit particularly well. Inky likes clicking green circles. When you don't got green circles to click and Inky is just a giant green circle, maybe you don't bring Inky. Which, you know, makes sense here. Instead, we've got Yukama Nox to throw water cannons around into the poor defenseless 2-Vine, and potentially throw a bit more concerted pressure into this Valish if it gets picked. Honestly, though, I like the Mimit into this board, and it looks like Sryzen agrees, as a double in of any one of his threats could very well be the threat that he needs into JD. Additionally, bringing a Crystal when you're seeing 2 Earths on your opposing field and a Yukama that can outspeed you before your Madness buff, yeah, maybe you leave the Valish in the basket this time. So, going into our game 1 between Sryzen and J-Doragon, we see some pretty interesting stuff go down here. I like the mix in this opener still, because we know it's Strange Fest. So this should be pretty fun in terms of this. Right, so the mix, obviously, as I said, right, we know that it's going to be living this opening salvo. That part is pretty set in stone here. It's well teched for this. But what we do not know at this point is whether that's going to be anticipated by Sryzen. Now, I expect Sryzen is, amongst other things, a very good person on his intel. He tends to know what people are going for. So I expect him to know that that's coming. What I don't know is how he's going to respond to it. We do see the Plague immediately land onto the Tuvine, though, getting it down to almost half its HP, and most importantly, locking it in. This is usually a death sentence for Tuvine, as it just gets doubled into the Crystal Spikes, bringing it down to 11.5%. The uppercut lands onto Volfia. It does look like this is a 2-shot, cleanly onto the Volfie, ignoring the mix, knowing that you will not take down the mix, and the Volfie is traded for what's left of a Tuvine. This is a pretty solid trade so far for Sryzen, in my opinion, because that Volfie was looking pretty intimidating. But the Tuvine, right, so the Tuvine is the best wind pressure against Potato. You kind of want to keep that at least a little bit alive, and it's kind of awkward now that it's not. But we'll have to see what happens next here. We do see the Yukama come out from JD, so there we go. I don't know if this is a Yukama board. I feel like this is a bait board. I feel like you Crystal Spikes the mix again, and then you just swap in Potato to eat the wastewater if this is indeed a Jabate. It's that or the mix is bouncing, but I don't expect the mix to bounce. I expect the thing that's weak to Mashuk to bounce after wandering in on a field that Mashuk probably takes it down with, because wastewater from Mashuk, while it will not one-hit KO a Yukama by any means, yeah, no. This was totally bait. So the Turok actually comes in instead, definitely more than capable of eating a wastewater from a Mashuk, and additionally it'll eat that Tornado to boot, potentially expecting the Noxolotl coming out there. The Turok eating both of those hits with a nice bit of poise right there, as the Tuvine's not going anywhere. Instead, aggression is fomented onto the Mashuk, which stops the Yukama from tearing things to pieces. Yeah, no, the heavy damage that this mix is already doing into Sryzen's lineup is kind of intimidating to see, and I hope they can get this back. Because at this point, like, one Emanip takes down the Mashuk, it can't stay there. Kinu can probably come in, but it's Kinu buffing, what, a nearly dead Tuvine that goes down to anything that blows at it? That feels really rough. You don't really want to bring your Kinu into that. What we could see, however, what I really would love to see, is the Mimit coming in to double up on Tuvine. That's still kind of rough, but I think that's something to go for here. And it would help temper the aggression out of JD and force potentially a reposition. Because I think, based on the calcs that we've seen, 2 CPGs into that, if magically the other Tuvine lives this turn, that could actually take down Mix, because it like gets it close to Puppet Master range, but doesn't take it down. And I don't think the Tuvine's going down this turn, unless it's going down to like a Stone Ball. The Tornado comes down from the Tuvine with the low special defense of Tuvine. Is this enough? Usually 11.5% is enough, and it is, in fact, as the Turok does take down the Tuvine. An unorthodox way to do it, but it checks out. As, yeah, looking at this board, I think this is not a bad time for Yeller to come in. Like, Mix is low on stamina, and that's really what you can kind of gamble on here. Instead, we see the Kinu come out to buff up the Tuvine and try to get its defenses to a point where it can sort of fist fight with this bird and this terrifying thing from beyond the void, the Mix, that is just coming in swinging on Sryzen's team. Kind of afraid to even attack it because of its gear choice, and it's definitely throwing a spanner in the works of Sryzen's intended win conditions. Because the problem is, you can't really go Kinu Yeller when you're staring a Psy Surge that did that much to a Mashuk in the face. So we do see the Kinu swap, as I'm expecting, yeah, no, this is where the Yeller comes down. Just get your aggression out first, but then get the buffs off before that. So with this, we do see the CPG land in on the mix, and it does bring it to 53%. The Quartz Dirt does not land on the Kinu, always a nice thing to see, but, oh, it lands just short of Puppet Master range. That's big. Okay, JD has to be careful right now. 41% is the danger zone for mix. You land in that, and you're just sad. Like, it's not good at all. You're just at your most vulnerable because you're not in that wonderful point where you're redirecting single target hits. You're just kind of sitting there, vulnerable, giggling because you're in danger. But, the problem is there's a bunch of really good repositions to happen here because, you know, there's a Yukama that hasn't really been touched. There's a Noxolotl that can still come into this field. I don't think it likes eating, like, needless CPGs, but I think it can because I don't expect a Feather Gatling to go into that slot that turn. And getting even one Narc hit off on the Yowler feels fantastic. In the meantime, though, I feel like Sryzen kind of has to punish this further. If you just let the mix sit there, or if you let it reposition for free, then that's not doing anything to help where you're at. Now, the other side of that is the Turok's pretty low on stamina too. I don't expect a double swap here, but we've seen JD swap a lot. My only question here is, like, does that just give Sryzen a free turn to show off? I feel like you got to punish the show off here. But the other side of that is, I don't see any way for Turok to threaten the Tuvine on this board. So, like, if there is going to be aggression going down, it makes perfect sense for it to go down onto the Yowler. We see the mix bounce out, as that does turn into Noxolotl. Might not like the Feather Gatling if that does wind up coming up, but instead we see the Turok bounce as well into the Yukama. It is the double swap. The water cannon combo is here, and that's a very frightening thing for the rest of the board. Obviously, the Savage Suplex is still going to hit like a relative ton of bricks. Even at this unbuffed state, Yowler's a pretty serious champ. Like, Noxolotl has a very high physical bulk, but at the same time, that still gets it down into the red, well, into the orange, and the exhaust is going to be kind of a frustration for it. That said, right, from this percentage, I think it's possible that a Tornado KOs, but I trust J-Doragon spreads. He's been playing with Noxolotl for a very long time. If anyone knows whether or not his Noxolotl is safe, it's JD. So if it does stay in, and the water cannon combo goes off, fantastic. If it doesn't, we still have an Aquatic Whirlwind that can hit Proteus here, which would be pretty frightening. Problem is there's no double up, so if the Mashuk comes in to take that hit, it probably lives at 20%. Actually, I don't know, it might not. 20% is risky even on resisted hits, and while Mashuks do spec for special defense, that's a tall order from a Mashuk. But Kinu eats the Aquatic Whirlwind super easy, and you love Kinu Yowler anyways, because that gets a protector buff onto Yowler. You want that because that's one of your win conditions. My concern here is if it swaps out, then it swaps into mix. But no, it stays in. It stays in on the Tornado. Does the bluff get called here? Yes, it's at 5%. The trance goes off. Pillow's going to happen. Regen's going to happen. The buffs are going to happen. This had better be a double in. As the water cannon comes down, is this a trade? No, it's a water cannon in on RTO instead. There's no board state that's changing here. The overexertion means that there's not going to be any recompense on that side, as the double in does happen. The Noxolotl is not allowed to sort of crawl back into life after swapping off the board. But really only one water cannon may have been needed there. The synergy on top of that didn't wind up doing much, but it did do a significant chunk of damage onto Yowler while no aggression was put onto this Yukama, which can now, I think, still alongside... Okay. I was about to go into this whole spiel about how Yukama really frightens this board out, but... Actually, no. It totally still does. Right, so my concern there was CPG onto the mix kills the mix. The upside here is that there's no way in hell that Yukama doesn't outspeed Proteus here with an Aquatic Whirlwind. And even at +1/+1, Tuvine special defense is not fantastic, unless this is a magical Strange Vest Mimit, which I've never seen, and congratulations there. Then yeah, that's a problem there. Of course, the Tuvine OX that turn. That makes much more sense. So instead, we do see the Kinu swap back in here. Oh, yeah, of course. I was just talking about how the tornado would exit that turn. Sorry, I thought another turn was going to swap over in my head. In the meantime, though, the water cannon does go down onto the now protector buffed Yowler, but is that going to survive the Psy Surge? The answer is yes at 5.4%, and the Hibernate will bring it right back to full after the overexertion as well. Well, right back to full, he says. Not quite full, but like, you know, healthier. And with that being the last turn of the chamomile immunity there, Sordiraum better hope that this is enough. Honestly, Sordiraum's still in technically a better position. They've got more Tems, which is always a genuine advantage there. HP-wise, they're just slightly ahead. But the buffs are the other thing that really helps them out here. JD is going to need to press this. I think an Energy Manip and an Aquatic does take down both the Yowler and anything else that comes into the Yowler spots. That feels like a bit of a chokehold. So that's quite a good thing to see. Now, the other side of this is, I don't know, does the Kinu get up to any shenanigans in this? I don't see anything the Kinu can do to really, like, change that on that side, unless it's just, like, a sneaky swap in on that side. But my problem is everything that Sordiraum wants to hard swap still dies to the priority of Mix at this point. Or alternately Yukama. It's like the combination of the two of these, having their priority means that it's a very, very hard time. Also, the Yowler OXing means that it cannot stay in on the board. So, yeah, this is kind of a problem there. We do not see swaps, as the Aquatic Whirlwind is going to come down onto Yowler that just kind of stays there. If it swaps, then it loses all of these buffs that he's worked hard to get, and he instead just decides to go down valiantly like a warrior. It's not quite swinging, because, you know, the overexertion happened, but that's how it be. In the meantime, we see a Hypnosis onto the Yukama, potentially trying to just, like, draw things out a little bit there, but I'm not entirely sure what that's gonna... Okay, what this does do is it protects the 2-Vine, maybe. I feel like the 2-Vine needs to be sacrificed onto to have any hope of keeping safe against the... Oh, sorry, it's not a 2-Vine anymore. I'm derping out there. It's a Yukama now. Right, so the Yukama does hit the mix pretty hard. It does not have its priority up, though, and unfortunately, Yukama still goes down to a crystal spikes. Even at +1/+1, there's no way the crystal spikes doesn't wind up doing that here. But we don't see the crystal spikes. We instead see the mix trying to get itself conserved. It actually does not go down, but it does go down to the overexertion and does not actually take out Proteus. This is massive. The Revitalize bringing it back up as well. Once again, Mimit stealing something from the opposing side has been shifting the position of games. Honestly, the Yukama is exactly what Sordiraum needs into the Turok as well. The Aquatic Whirlwind's going to be pretty frightening here. This is precisely the turnabout that was needed. With the mix down, suddenly J-Doragon's in a horrifying state. As, yeah, we're going to see a pretty big swap here. Yeah. No, now that this is a Yukama, suddenly this entire game's turned on its head. So the Aquatic Whirlwind takes down the Turok before it can blink, and then Yukama's kind of left slinging against the world. The Mashuk is low enough that that's possible, but how do you deal with the +1/+1 Yukama? And it looks like this is still a bulky Mimit, so it can eat a lot of this punishment. Oh, boy. Yeah, that's looking kind of rough there. So the Aquatic Whirlwind does come down. This is easily going to take out the Turok here. I don't see a world in which it doesn't. Yep, no, that's a Turok down. So now it is Yukama against the world. I don't see an out for JD at this point. So, the Beta Burst goes down onto the Yukama, and then we'll see what happens there as Sordiraum wins this first engagement versus J-Doragon in an upset given the earlier point of this game. I'm wondering, will that momentum be maintained? And with that, 1 second, we're going to swap back over to this. I apologize for the scuffed state of some of these overlays. I'm just working with what we have here in the background, as we're going to quickly double check how quickly our fine compatriots are going to get inside this next game. But yeah, no, once again, that was a really good example of Mimit turning battles on their head, stealing the win condition, well, stealing one of the win conditions of JD inside that, and using that to take down the mix from the overexertion. That was a fantastic series of plays there. Very fun to see. Right, so the other thing that we're going to be doing, looking in the background here, is... Oh dear, it looks like we are going to have a bit of an overlap. So unfortunately, we're not going to have another possibility to check out the other battle there. And since we're still knuckle deep inside this one, we're going to go ahead and check this one first. If it's possible, we will catch the end of the Tsubaki Sryzen match as well, because I'm really interested in seeing how that is as well. Right, so we're going to go ahead and quickly go ahead and see if JD and Setsuna are in their next match. And they are. Give us just a moment. Oop. And there we are. Fantastic. So getting into our first set of bans, once again, we see the Firequish banned out of JD. Makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of aggression that you do not want to be dealing with. And in the meantime, we see the Mimit winding up... Oh, sorry, we see the Mashuk ban once again for Sorty-Rum out into JD. Definitely a frightening thing to see there as well. Good to get that out of the field. But in the meantime, this is a mirror of our previous game. So it'll be fun seeing if perhaps any different plays wind up happening out of this. We see the OCR ban again. This is just basically a carbon copy of our last draft, folks. Cycrox ban seems like that's happening again from Sorty-Rum's side. He's kind of considering it. Is this going to be a shift around again? It certainly doesn't seem like he's going to want to ban that Yukama, given the fact that he used that on the last board. And if he winds up popping off in the same way again, that should be really interesting to see. So with that, we see the Kinu showing up on Sorty-Rum's side again. Yeah, no, this is just a carbon copy draft. We do not see the Turok yet, but that could easily be the last pick out of JD. I don't see any real reason why he wouldn't. The Valish is still just as rough into the lineup of JD as it was the last time, even though that wasn't necessarily the thing that got picked there. Like, even though we don't see the Turok yet, it's still pretty rough into it. Outside of that, we got what? Still, I think it's Mimit Yowler off of Sorty-Rum's side. There's no reason not to pick it. Mimit was instrumental to winning the last game. And in the meantime, Yowler is just a mighty force that you do have to still attend to. And yep, we're just still considering this. Is there a possibility of a last-minute Valish in there? My problem is, if you're relying on a Madness buff Valish, there's still a Volfi on this board. There's still a Turok that could come in swinging. You gotta conserve your Mashuk, and you gotta nuke the Volfi as hard as you did last game, because that did go down super quick. But you gotta make sure the same thing happens again. Problem is, JD's learning just as much as Sorty-Rum is. And there's every likelihood that they're gonna play this game different. With this in mind, we get into our game 2 of this best of 2 between JD and Sorty-Rum. Let's find out precisely how well this goes. So, looking into this in our first match, once again, okay, right. So, since, as we saw from the last game, the Volfi basically ate it to a combination of Uppercut, Feather Gatling, are we going to see an early swap out of the Volfi this turn, or is it going to be sacked to get the same Plague onto the 2-Vine? Because honestly, that was still a fairly reasonable trade out of JD. Obviously, you know, the Volfi would have been fantastic into a lot of the other things, and it would have been great against that Yukama that Sorty-Rum wound up grabbing at the end there. But at the same time, taking out the original 2-Vine was one of the ways in which JD really cemented their mid-game lead. So, honestly, I think that could still work out fairly well there. My next big concern, though, is... does Sorty-Rum respond in the same way? Do they just try to take out the Volfi again? If they're expecting the same play, they should probably go for the same thing, because that was technically favorable for them. But do they want to confirm the KO with the 2-Vine, or do they want to lock something else better in there? They could, in fact, just steal the Volfi, swapping in Mimit this turn. I think that's actually not a bad play for them, since we know that's a bulky Mimit. That into a mix gives them potentially spread, depending on what JD is running, and also just a really strong answer into mix when we know that's a Strange Vest mix. Dust Vortex turn 2 into that, you swap that for sure, and then you still threaten Plague or Dust Vortex on anything into that slot. That 50-50 makes it very hard to swap in there. And yeah, outside of that, right. So I think JD still has no reason not to Crystal Spikes the 2-Vine and Plague the 2-Vine. Yeah, no, that double-in happens. The 2-Vine stays in. All right, so this is just a carbon copy of the last play, as it looks like. We see the Crystal Spikes land in as well, bringing the 2-Vine down to that ever-familiar frightening death zone of 11.5%, where it goes down to a stiff breeze, but it still has a tornado available, as the uppercut and the Feather Gatling will take out the Volphy. All right, so once again, this is so far playing picture perfect to the last game that we saw between JD and Sortirum, as the Ukama comes in this time instead. We are seeing some variety here now. Right, so this could potentially be our next sort of... oh, no, that's still the same as last time as well, because it was the Ukama debate last time. Right. I guess I'm just stuck watching the same exact game again, folks, but we'll see whether any variety happens here. Maybe the fake out happens, and we see the water cannon go in on this. Definitely seems interesting. Okay, honestly, this is kind of a treat. I don't get to see many, like, carbon copy games, but... you know, sometimes these things happen. It's cool to be able to see. So, right. Looking at this, I do still think the Ukama's best is bait here. You don't assume that the Ukama's staying in. Like, you still tornado that slot because it's strong, but we saw the Turok come in last time. Do we see Sortirum swap change any of their moves into this as well, and perhaps not tornado the Ukama, but just CPG it or something like that instead, or even Feathergat it or something like that? None of that makes sense is the thing, because like ultimately your best offense into this is gonna continue to be your wind pressure, and you need to use your priority move to make sure that you outspeed mix in this appropriate time. So we do see the Turok coming again, and we are continuing our trend of exactly identical turns to our previous one, as the mix and the Turok are on the same board. The wastewater comes in on the Turok, which, yeah, alongside the tornado would have taken out the Ukama, but in the meantime, we're stuck seeing that Scythe Surge land on that Mashuk again. And yeah, no, this is looking awful familiar, folks. 11.5% with a trapped 2-Vine and a Mashuk at 20.4%. How much you want to bet on the next turn? We're going to see this 2-Vine get tornadoed, and we're going to wind up seeing Mimit swap in on the other slot. Don't tell me why I'm asking. Like, don't ask me why I'm predicting this. See, the funny thing about making a best predicted course of action is that if you deviate from that the second time, especially when it's such a mind game like this one, you could wind up falling into a better position as a result of that, like knowing that your opponent is going to do the same thing that they did previously. The problem is a lot of these have already been gamed out against them, and honestly, JD and Sortirum have probably fought each other a number of times, both of them being from the same club. But, it'll be interesting seeing if it is just a mirror up until the last possible moment when the misplay involving the mix occurred. I don't expect that to necessarily be the case. I do expect there to be some deviation from this on Sortirum's side, primarily because Sortirum was on the back foot for a lot of the last mid-game onwards, and being at this point kind of hurt him. So we see the energy manipulation take down the Mashuk, and we see a Feather Gatling instead onto the mix, lowering it to 72% rather than anything else. And we see a Stone Ball onto the 2-Vine, so we've finally deviated. And with this, Sortirum does still wind up in a comparatively bad position. Like, now they lost their Mashuk, that's different than the previous one, but now they've gained a +1/+1 Turok. I'd say that's a pretty interesting trade that's happened there. The Turok on the side of Sortirum gives them another strong answer to mix, but it also gives them something that dies hard to Ukama with no way to really threaten out that Ukama. So that would be an interesting thing to see in terms of where this goes. Like, if that Ukama comes out on mix, then I just feel like there's not much that JD can do in response what was there? Sorry, there's not much that Sryzen can do in response to that, because like Yukama just tears this field apart. Like he just water cannon, you aquatic whirlwind, and then yeah, no rock bird, no like. So we see a beta burst come down onto the expected Yukama, and the feather gatling comes down onto the Kinu. My next question is, does this one run Nox Bomb? It doesn't look like it does, or if it was a stone ball expecting the mix to stay in, or at least to get damage on perhaps Potato. Just feels like that's a rough read in case there. So looking at the rest of this, right, so Sryzen is down to just a bear, a bird, and a fairy. These are not the best things to go up against a full health Noxolotl in the back. The bird is a possibility there. It's probably going to be forced to reposition, because I don't think you just let this exist in front of a Yukama that is locked and loaded and is going to whirlwind you this turn. Problem is, you then have to let your Yowler eat that, which, you know, that also sucks. You have the revit. The revit's always great, but you have to deal with it. So we see the Yowler come in, and it's definitely going to be eating... Well, I feel like it's probably going to be eating a whirlwind this turn. Instead, we do see the Noxolotl come out. Is this just a water cannon saving the priority? It looks like it is, as instead we wind up seeing the Yowler go down to 73% from the water cannon. Conserving the priority is always a wise move, because that means that you can just hit better on the next time. And the Hypno goes down on the Yukama, buying for time. This does mean that the Kinu can come in. That the Mimic can come in on the other Kinu slot. So Narcoleptic Hit is another thing that JD can throw into this board that feels pretty good. You throw that onto the Mimic slot if you're expecting, onto the Kinu slot if you're expecting the Mimic to come in, and yeah, no, that just feels pretty strong into this. Honestly, I don't see any reason to consider that badly inside this. Right, so the Yukama does bounce as we see the mix hit the board again. Another wise thing to do if you're expecting a double Yowler board. Those Psy Surges are going to clap into these, as we saw last time, as the Mimic does hit. So we are going to see double bear happen. And both of these bears already have protector buffs as well. The Toxicking comes down onto that Yowler, so that's a bit of poison takes on top of that. The show off happens on the other one, and double Yowler is going to be coming in swinging. Is this enough to tear apart J-Doragon? I don't know. That Strange Fest mix is still going to be a big concern for them, and we've seen how much punishment Noxolotl can take physically. Oh, I was mistaken there. Looking at the status log right now, I do see that the actual OG bear did come in after the Kinu, so we do not have a protector buff on real bear. So that is a thing. Man. Dropping all sorts right here. My apologies, folks. In the meantime, though, looking at this, yeah, no, double bear's pretty frightening. The Oshidashi lands onto the mix, and it is enough to get it down to 52%, but not enough to get it into Puppet Master, which is good. This means we could see another one. Question is, does this comebacker wind up hitting it into it? The answer is not, because it just dies to a Psy Surge and a Narc hit in quick succession, and is underspeeds. That's nightmarish. Oh man, after what looked like a really spooky board, seeing it go down to both a Surge and a Narc hit just feels awful. Well, with that, yeah, no, it's looking like Sryzen's gonna wind up not winning this game unless a miracle happens, because now what do you do against the mix? Even if it winds up happening there, it's just a rough time. We still have all of these tools that JD has in the back. We've got the Turok that can just clap into mix, into Kinu. We've got Yukama that's still just, you know, it can walk back in and be spooky. So this is what looks like the balls deep play right now. We are going up to a +4/+4 Mimic Yowler, and it's going to be taking on the world right now. I mean, this is genuinely the only path to victory allowed or afforded to Sryzen right now. Will the comebacker be anywhere near enough? Thanks to the Strange Fest, it is nowhere near enough. With the resistance on top of that, it does bring it down to 32%, which is comfortably in Puppet Master range. Even though it's exhausted this turn, it has no reason to stay on the board. The Oshidashi lands in onto the Noxolotl, and it outspeeds the Noxolotl due to the speed investment I'm assuming is on that Mimic, meaning that you don't get comebacker, meaning it's stuck just sort of flapping its hands against this board because it does not have any attack buffs. And the dwindling remaining position of Sortirum in this game is just going to be falling down and down to more and more hits as the Emanip comes down, and we're just, you know, once again, we saw this in JD's last game, just chipping away at the hardcore thing at the end until the game is over, and this Acid Reflux will seal the deal as our second game goes to J-Doragon. Congratulations. And yeah, we do have our first 1-1. This changes the number of points that are afforded to both of our players. If I recall correctly, that's either 2 or 1 points, rather than the 3 we've seen in the previous ones there. So that's pretty cool to see. In the meantime, though, let's see if we can't catch a cheeky match in Group D. Hopefully Tsubaki and Sryzen are still going on. We're going to quickly go ahead and check out there. It looks like we missed our game 1 out of them, but I'm going to see if they still have their second game going on. It looks like we're just in time to catch the second one. We're just going to take a small minute for our 2 contestants there to go for it. It will be interesting running that back and seeing who won the first game. But Tsubaki is no joke, obviously. He's one of the most powerful players out of Exotic French, and I'm sure him and Sryzen have scrimmed together before, so it'll be interesting seeing what both of them bring against each other. I do expect Tsubaki to be bringing something slow and steady into a lot of these sort of matches, because that tends to be what they've been doing pretty strong. Tsubaki is known for being kind of a chess master player that wants to create a board state that their opponent just cannot play through, and they're forced into positions where they're just like gonna get mentally exhausted and misplay, and then you push and push and push and push. So if he's managed to create that again in this heavy aggression that we have here, then that's fantastic. We'll have to see if that winds up being the case. In the meantime, though, I'm going to ask for a small amount of breaks that we're going to get here from our organizers as we wait for our next contestants to enter their match. Thank you very much for your patience, folks, and we'll have some more games for you in just a moment. And with that, we are getting into our second game between Tsubaki-chan and Sryzen. Sadly, due to schedule overlaps, we were unable to catch the first one. And I'm really excited to see what both of these guys are bringing into this. Sryzen, we saw earlier, has brought some heavy aggression into the TemTeam Cup, just like pretty much a bag of knives they throw at their opponent. The Hedgin and Mimit destroying Wiki Kernel. But in the meantime, we do wind up... I'm just really curious to see what Tsubaki's actually bringing to this, and whether it's going to be something that can shape up into some of this digital aggression that Sryzen has brought. Just waiting for our fine fellow to pick there. There we go. And looking at this, oh boy, we have a Schween. This is a double sacrifice team. Yaller is insta-banned. So we lose the Kinu Yaller combo there, but we maintain a lot of other threats here. Valorend, Valish, Schween. Schween is really interesting. I want to see what's happening with this. This looks like a relaxed team, if you ask me, because this is the sort of thing that you can see out of like a Tsubaki style team that wants to get your madness buff set up. But like, oh man, That's going to be really fun. So we see the Ragnet ban, which makes a lot of sense if you want to lean in on the guys. And also we have this Valorant just vibing, which makes a lot of sense there. In the meantime, as we've seen before with Sryzen, we've got the potentially Pigment Inverter Chromion here that's going to do fantastically into some of these Toxics if that is indeed the case. Definitely an interesting first pick. It wasn't anything we actually got to see in the previous games with Wiki Kernel, so I'm super stoked to see what this winds up actually being. Is it Sinner Typer? Is it in fact Pigment Inverter? We'll find out in a short amount of time. In the meantime, though, we do see the Naga first pick, so that's definitely like, you know, straight out on the table. Just, you know, I definitely want this. Decidor and Naga is definitely Fright into Sryzen's team. Like that's going to mess with a lot of the speed tiering on that side. It's still a very aggressive lineup. So it means a lot to see this Nagais come through. So looking at this though, right, so if this is a Sinner Typer Chromion, then this means that we're likely to see the Hedgen picked into that. So that could be something that we see there as well. We've got the Mimit into it as well, meaning that we got a lot of other things that could wind up working for that. But I don't know if you do that into a projected Decidor board. You don't gotta go fast into that. You want like Mimit, actually. I like Mimit into this. Double Chromion could actually be exactly what we need here. And there we go. We see the Kinu on top of that, protecting from the double microwaves and giving another defensive bonus. Meaning that we're going to get +3 to Nagais on special defense when it gets this madness buff off. We do see the Hedgen after all. The bluff is called into a Decidora. So this is pretty interesting. So, right. At this point, we're into our bans, and honestly, if I'm looking at Tsubaki, I probably want to get this Valish out of the way. I feel like Valish is kind of important. The Fire Quotient, the OCR, I feel like afterthoughts here. The Mimit is taken out of. That makes a lot of sense as well. Mimit into what's appearing to be a lot of digital aggression means that's just one, like, it means you don't get double Hedge, and it means you don't get double Chromion. You don't want either of those, because those actually mess a lot with your current core, and if this is Pigment Inverter for whatever reason, then having another one of those means that your Toxics are that much more vulnerable. You don't want any of that. In the meantime, though, Sryzen needs to consider what they're banning here. The Valorant is always a reasonable consider. I do actually like the Caliban as well. They've got answers for the Mashuk. That's not really a problem. Valish is always significant, but we do have Valish Firecoish in the back for Sryzen, so they could, in my opinion, leave that open. But no, we do see a Valish ban. I still respect that. Even if you have tools for it, then, like, it can still pop off if your aggression is directed somewhere else, which Tsubaki is an expert at. Yeah, like he's very good at misdirection when he plays and opportunistically getting buffs when he needs to. Just like inside those little spaces of time that you don't expect for like high value turns like that to happen. So in the meantime, this does mean that he picks the rest of his Toxics into this, which does look like kind of a nightmare. I do hope that's a Pigverter at this point with that. So we see our Chromion Hedgen hit the field in the face of a Nagais Kinu. So that's basically, you know, your digitals into your mentals, but the mental here is a Decidor and Nagais by all likelihood, and it's probably just gonna madness buff in their faces, and then you get the reactive Vial proc, and then you just live. Feels pretty good if you ask me. Now the question is, does Sryzen read this? Do they wind up hitting the Kinu instead? Does the Kinu even stay in? The Kinu does stay in. That's very bold as the madness buff goes down. So that's like our very first thing here. The beta burst just goes in to soften up the Chromion, getting it down to 66%. That's actually super impressive. The harmful microwaves comes out, but with the reactive Vial, that's actually nothing. Oh my god, that's barely any damage after that. But the other harmful microwaves does come out as well. It is Sinner Typer, as it turns out. So between the two of those, the microwaves takes this Nagais down to a comparatively comfortable 40%, given the fact that it can now slap back with a big juicy Fury. And yeah, there's not much in the back that can take that. On Sryzen's side, we have the Mashuk, and that's about it. So we see the Mashuk come down, trying to eat that. The microwaves comes down anyways. I almost would have preferred the resin trap there. I almost feel like that would have done more. If nothing else, it would have kept the guys in, stopping it from just sort of running ripshot over this. I guess that was to get the one prio without the synergy to make sure it popped off before that, but now the Revitalize comes down and the guys is back to 51%. Like, Sryzen is very clearly on the back foot just into this. This Nagai's is looking to be pretty intimidating. It's unfortunate we didn't get to see the Schween draft, but you know what? All these Tems are pretty good stuff out of Tsubaki. So, getting into this, already Tsubaki's on the lead, having taken out the Chromion by softening it up and then just giving it a big ol' swat. Even the Mashuk did not appreciate the damage that it took from that Fury. It's definitely a very squishy Mashuk having gone down to 35% from a resisted hit. We do see the Valish having hit the board. Is this gonna be enough? We have a lot of things that like eating Valish hits in the back. And, like, this could be a free Madness buff turn. My problem is if you Madness buff, if that's like a Psy Surge into that, that's a lot of damage you're taking. So, if I'm looking at this, my other question is, why would you press here with your Nagais at this point? Tsubaki's perfectly comfortable, I think, just bringing in Boxroom and his Valorant there to start getting buffs up, start scaring away this Mashuk, which is mega squishy and dies to a single Feather Gatling. Why run the risk when you can do this? Unless you're here to pressure out the Valish before it's able to set up. So that's my other big question here. So, looking at this, my question is, does Sryzen just sort of take the bait? Do they just Madness buff up this turn? And does that seal their fate if they do? I think you wind up OXing if you try to go for a Psy Surge here, and I'm not entirely sure that that's the best outcome. Like, I suppose at this point, Nagai's is just creating space, right? I mean, it's a big spooky thing, but Tsubaki has other things that he can win the game with. He's got the Valorant, he's got the Calibus, all of these trade pretty well into a Valish Firecoish combo. The Mashuk definitely punches out the Valish later on. It's all fine. So, we do see the Kinu swap out into the Mashuk. This makes a lot of sense. If nothing else, like, we know that J-Doragon is running out soon. It's been roughly 4 turns. Like, I think this is the 4th turn. So we do wind up seeing the Nagais just Psy Surge into the Koish spot, taking it out in one fell swoop, just eviscerating the synergy partner right there. As the base jump, oh, it's a physical Valish. Well then. Yeah, I didn't expect that. This actually works out pretty well for this. And the overexertion is really rough on the Nagais there, which is looking suddenly very vulnerable. Right, now that we know this is a physical Valash, this is very interesting. I still think Tsubaki's just got too much for it to break through, because the problem is, how do you deal with the Calibus at this point? How do you deal with the Valorant in the background? That's just a lot that you need to push back here. Because, like, yeah, you got the physical Valish, and it's gonna go burr, but at this point, Nagais has taken out 2 Tems and most of your Mashuk's health with absolutely no recompense from you. So it's kind of looking like a bit of a problem there. And the Kinu is perfectly ready to swap into this Mashuk and make it an actual pain for even the Hedge-In to start taking down, because I'm fairly certain this is a Parrier Mashuk, unless Tsubaki started drinking the tireless sauce. So, looking at this, our next question is, what else do we see? Also, adorable name on the Kinu there, Swappy. Love it. Right, so, if I'm Hedge-In, right, I feel like you still have to punish this Nagais. You can't just let it T-pose there and get another attack next turn. Although it's very unlikely that it will now that J-Doragon is up and it was going so fast with its Psy Surges. It's likely that you could just leave it there. I think it's probably better if you just go for it now. Quick sharp stabs is all you need. It should be fine. Leaving the Plasma Beam or the Harmful Microwaves, I don't remember which one it was with this Hedge-In, to go into Boxroom, which will at least throw damage onto it. Instead, though, we do see the Nagais swap out, which makes a lot of sense. Why throw away a perfectly good Nagais when you can let it eat an attack later on? The Valorant comes in. I was almost expecting the Kinu there. But if you're expecting sharp stabs to come down, oh my god. the Mashuk outspeeds. That's really interesting. I did not expect a Mashuk to outspeed Valish there. That's a very fast Mashuk. That's quite nice. So the tenderness onto Valish is just, that's just good stuff. -1 attack is not something you want to see when you're physical Valish. Oh, you're still under DA. Never mind. I'm bad at counting turns. Yeah, no, that still gets me. Gets me every time. Yeah, no, if the tenderness goes before the Valish there, then yeah, that makes a lot more sense. But, yeah, no, at this point, my problem is the biggest form of aggression is kind of just sort of sitting out in the open. But, yeah, Boxstrom can't take another digital attack. The Kinu can probably swap in, but I don't see any reason why. I think you just go Calibus there. Or, alternately, you just try to get a cheeky turbo onto your... Is that the plan? Get a cheeky turbo onto Valorant? I'm not entirely sure here. I do know that at this point you can kind of just let Sryzen throw their aggression out against these Tems, which are roughly superfluous into this. Like, I don't know about superfluous, actually. The Mashuk probably goes down to most of what Tsubaki has. Then a Guise will certainly take it down. Hell, even the Kinu might be able to, but you kind of want your Valorant to be able to, and getting the turbo off just means that you outspeed it most likely. Feels pretty good. But yeah. My concern here is... I don't really see any way for Sryzen to get back from this. The cage comes down from the Mashuk that just traps everything in, which I suppose is actually really good if you just want to clean this board apart. The Valish and the hedge in together, the Plasma Beam just takes out the rest of the Mashuk, no problem. And in the meantime, this Valorant is just getting those that plume off without synergy. Right, so at this point, I still feel like Calibus is pretty easy in here, as is Kinu. Like, you could even just go for, like, a free Kinu into Calibus. Like, you just go back and forth with that. I still don't see, unless this Hedgen just, like, balls out of control, precisely how you come back from this. We do see the Kinu swap, cheeky into there, just getting that in so that way you get your protector buff off on the Valorant, just making it that much harder to take down. Up to +1/+2 now means that those special attacks are going to be really rough, and Calibus is still waiting in the wings, untouched. That's a lot for Sryzen to take down with a -1 Valish, a Hedgen with only 49.2% stamina, and a Mashuk with only half of its limbs. And with this, we see the Kinu swap out for Guise. If any offense is going in there, I suppose that's fine. It just eats the hits. But instead, we do see the aggression directed straight onto the Valorant. So that's a free swap for Guise as well. That's pretty fantastic right there. The Feathergat goes down onto the Valish, getting it down to a keen 53% with low stamina to boot means that, yeah, no, once again, Sryzen's in a rough spot. The Valorant getting knocked down solo that single turn, though, does show that Sryzen's still in this race and could potentially keep it coming here. My problem is you need to throw some aggression into the Guise this turn. This feels like bait, but you have to respect it. If you don't respect it, that's just a Fury and GG. So you kind of have to throw stabs into that spot. So Valorant swaps out for the Calibus. And it turns out the Guise isn't bait. It was genuinely looking to attack or just die in the face of them, but that's giving health to a Valish. That's very interesting to see. The Mucus eats the Plasma Beam burn, but that's surprising. I was kind of expecting that to just be a ruse. Still, though, this does end with a +1/+1 onto the Calibus, which makes sense if Tsubaki's repositioning goes, okay, right, the Valorant's not got much health left at all. That was a big, hard double in. I need to make sure this doesn't happen again for my other 10. I need to make sure that I just throw buffs into that. Which, yeah, no, it looks like that's what's happening right now, as they go straight into the buffs for Kinu into that. Well, we could see a sacrifice or a stonewall this turn, and that would make this Calibus really hard to take down, especially since the Valish is plumb out of stamina as well. The Fire Tornado is going to come down into the Kinu. Does look like the Kinu is trying to get some cheeky shenanigans off, but it will not manage to, as the Fire Tornado does take it out. We see base jump onto the Calibus, and oh boy, that's a great wall. That is quite the wall. Barely any damage from the -1 Valish onto this beast of a Calibus. What seems likely here is, at this point, if Sryzen just tries to take down the Valorend and then, like, deals with the Calibus after the fact, you still have a tireless Mashuk. That's going to take a little bit of time for the Calibus to take down. It's going to be swinging back fairly hard once it gets those +1/+1s off. So you could try to move things back from that. I do think Sryzen's not in a spot where they would, like, actually just lose to this. But I do think it's still pretty uphill. Like, this +1/+1 Calibus is going to be an absolute monster to take down. One hit from it will take down the Hedgen, so you kind of can't protect both slots here. Yeah, I suppose that gives health to Valish, but, like, you know what Valish could use a bit more than health? Blue bar. Blue bar would be lovely here. Some stamina to click those lovely moves would be fantastic. Also, not -1 attack. Both of those things are severely impeding Sryzen actually sort of continuing this momentum at this moment in time. I don't think you can really afford to swap in Mashuk either, so you just sack the Valish here? I don't know if you sack the Valish here. Valish with Res Badge still feels like that's the best attacker Sryzen has. The Hedgen has obviously still been very powerful as well. The Feather Gatling comes in onto the Valish, taking it down to 16%. The Toxic Ink's going to be coming in as well. That is going to be enough alongside the Poison Take to take down the Valish. He does sack the Valish. Meaning it's Mashuk Hedgen against two pretty implacable walls. So my concern here is that I'm pretty sure the Feathergat outspeeds from this Valorend. So if it does, then this Mashuk probably just eats it right there. If it doesn't, and we see like a plasma beam uppercut into that Valorend, then yeah, I think that's actually pretty good. I think that that could be Sryzen's out here. Now that said, Tsubaki is just going to be a mighty force and will be very hard to actually take down inside this. Yeah, no, the HKS is going to be coming down in here. With the burn, is that enough to save it? No, of course it isn't. We saw how frail this Mashuk was, and with that, it's Hedgen against a Calibus that can probably take it down in one hit, and it does. The Water Jet slams into it, and Sryzen winds up going down to Tsubaki. Congratulations, Tsubaki, on winning this second game. I'm really excited to hear how the first one wound up going. And with that, that is our last match that I have available to broadcast to everybody today. We do have a jam-packed schedule tomorrow, though, so I do hope everybody tunes in. There's a lot of life still left in this cup. It's going to be going all the way until the end of the May. And yeah, no, it should be really interesting to see. Thank you so much once again, and I hope everybody has a fantastic night. I've been Quarter.